In fact, I probably had enough deadly snakes in my room to wipe out the entire population of residents in the apartments. These are true tales of my African adventures. May this inspire you, deter you, caution you, and above all, entertain you. Well, this story leaves me with some very cold memories. The title of the story is Snakebite, Supper, and Suicide. At age 17, I had become somewhat of a young snake expert. By the term expert here, I mean the following. I had memorized all the Latin names and common names of all the known South African snakes, their general habits, localities, sizes, and all possible relevant information surrounding each species. My main source of knowledge was a book titled The Snakes of Southern Africa by W.F.M. Fitzsimmons, an incredible work by a dedicated man. I could produce most of the line drawings from this book at will and reveled in this knowledge I had acquired. I had captured by then most of the more common venomous and non-venomous snakes within the region I lived in. We lived in Hillbrow, a bustling suburb in Johannesburg we had moved to from Natal. In my room on the 7th floor of the block of flats, I housed a number of snakes, some highly venomous, in concealed boxes and small crates on my private balcony and in my cupboards and under my bed without my parents' knowledge. They fondly assumed I had a few harmless snakes. I had cautioned them never to tamper with the containers, as the snakes could bite and leave a nasty wound. Little did they know. In fact, I probably had enough deadly snakes in my room to wipe out the entire population of residents in the apartments. On one notable evening, my young sister Elizabeth and a friend of mine were chatting away in my room as usual, and I was fiddling with various snakes. My friend, who had similar interests and was not prone to bouts of unreasonable fear, had agreed to help me with a procedure I was about to perform. I reached into the cupboard and withdrew a snake inside a box from my secret hoard, a large black Egyptian cobra. They are now known as the snouted cobra. I placed the crate on the floor between us. This snake had contracted a bacterial mouth infection, a very common ailment in captive snakes. The treatment was to take a cotton bud and remove the residue from the infection, then dip the other end into a bottle of hydrogen peroxide and dab the raw tissue in the infected areas. The snake was a big one, between 1.7 and 2 meters in length, robust and muscular. I was grateful that my friend was in attendance. He had agreed to hold the snake in the acceptable grip a snake handler is trained to use. I assisted in arranging the snake's head and neck in the grip, then proceeded to prepare my medical kit. Whilst holding my left hand in an elevated position, I pressed gently on the snake's snout with my thumb, causing it to open its mouth, whilst keeping my fingers out of range of its formidable armory of teeth and fangs. Treatment was proceeding as planned. After a minute or two, the loose material had been removed, and I was now ready to apply the hydrogen peroxide. By this time, my less experienced friend's grip on the powerful snake had clearly relaxed, unbeknown to a trusting me. As I applied the first dab of the hydrogen peroxide saturated cotton bud to the raw tissue in the snake's mouth, the poor creature could no longer contain itself and felt this was do or die time to defend its dignity. It thrust its broad head forward towards its tormentor, me again, and clamped its jaws around my right index finger. The venom is potently neurotoxic and may ultimately cause death due to respiratory failure. An average cobra may yield up to 300 milligrams of venom, whereas as little as 25 milligrams is fatal in humans. I felt as if the snake had pumped a pint of venom into me. One fang penetrated my fingernail on the top and deposited a veritable pool of venom under the nail. This pool of venom was clearly visible to the naked eye. The other fang penetrated my finger above the first joint. Those who are familiar with Egyptian or snouted cobras will know that a bite from this determined snake is not a fleeting affair. It holds to its mark, forcing venom into the fang puncture wounds, and overstays its welcome quite admirably, for the snake that is. In the initial few shocking moments, we all remained rooted to our positions. I then clamped my hand around the snake's neck and pried it loose. I can't say what my friend and sister were doing at the time. All I remember is staring at my finger, the blood, and then feeling the pain. I forced the snake back into his crate and knew I was in trouble, deadly trouble. I kept only 2 ampules of anti-venom at the time, hopelessly inadequate to neutralize the venom from such a large bushveld cobra, but it would be a help, something like using a band-aid for a broken arm. A short time lapsed until we eventually fumbled the snakebite kit open. I can't remember if it was my sister who retrieved the serum kit. I just remember it being in my hand. I had to treat myself as my sister was far too young and my friend was in a powerless state and far too inexperienced, as if I was a pro. I snapped the top of the first vial of serum off and with the help of my friend, drew the contents into a 10 cc syringe with a large and thick needle. Observing the pool of venom under my nail, I figured this was my first port of call. I braced and performed a most sadistic act on myself. I plunged the needle into the end of my finger and drove it in and upward until it was visible under my nail in the venom pool. Then I squeezed the plunger to saturate the venom with serum. Due to my youth, inexperience, and lack of physiological ken, it had escaped me that 10 cc's of serum could not fit under my nail. That initially didn't deter me from attempting this impossible feat. I had almost fainted from the shock of the pain. Finally defeated, I withdrew the needle and injected the balance of the serum into the back of my hand. The second vial I injected into what I fondly thought was a vein in my arm. The situation was critical, but in my youthful state, I felt calm and indestructible. "Come for dinner," commanded a voice from the dining room. Dinner? My mother had finished preparing dinner. The table was set, and I, my friend, and my sister were now summarily ordered to the dining table. My father was a family dinner man. This was Sunday evening, and it was time for dinner. Ever considerate of others, I didn't want to panic my parents and was frankly embarrassed at the turn of events. Besides, I didn't want to jeopardize my snake collection. I quickly hatched a plan, so considerate, so incredibly short-sighted, and almost tragic, yet brilliant in my 17-year-old estimation. I swore my sister and friend to secrecy. The plan was as follows. We would exit the room and proceed to dinner. Should it be noticed by my parents, I had simply hurt my finger, but it was no big deal. We would have supper as if nothing had transpired in the world. Conversation would be normal, and no one would mention the war. After dinner, my friend would politely leave, my sister would continue as usual, and I would go off to visit a friend down the road. What we ate I cannot tell. We talked and ate. I had no appetite. I kept my throbbing, swelling, bleeding hand out of sight. I began to feel the effects of the envenomation and began to fear somewhat for my future. At last, endless last, the meal came to an end, and just as the second part of our plan was to be effected, guess what? We were asked to clear the table, tidy up, and clean the dishes. How I managed this charade, I do not know. Ordinarily, after such a lapse of time, one might easily become incapacitated by such a serious envenomation. After an eternity of tidying up, we were free to go. My route was a clear one, not to my friend up the road or down the road, but to the old Johannesburg General Hospital, luckily only a few minutes' walk from our residence. When you are 17 years old, nurses and doctors don't necessarily consider your record of events to be solid, true, and sound. I had a heck of a job convincing the nursing sister that my utterly unbelievable story was indeed true. I knew at this point that I was slowly dying, and I used the last of my persuasive ability, finally with success, to convince my skeptic that the sequence of events had indeed transpired as I reported them. My symptoms and the apparent knowledge I displayed must have penetrated the nursing sister's veil of doubt. She called for the emergency doctor and attendant staff to attend to my failing body. My breathing had become extremely difficult. I had become somewhat incontinent and was now unable to walk or support myself. Before lapsing into total paralysis, I was able to brief a young, enlightened doctor as to my needs. 8 to 10 ampules of serum, polyvalent anti-venom, I said, intravenously and life support if necessary. I exclaimed this in my failing moments. I was wheeled into a narrow cubicle and the curtain was drawn shut. My head was tilted to my right, and there I remained, fully conscious, eyes staring ahead but unable to move. Of course, the hospital had no serum. This is common. And an emergency vehicle was sent to retrieve antivenom, God knows where from, I suspect from the institute nearby. While I lay in this state, an explosion of activity erupted in the general emergency area. Some deadly drama was unfolding, and I was still conscious enough to wonder what might be the cause. Presently I heard the sound of activity approaching my cubicle. The curtain was thrust back open, and a trolley was wheeled into the space next to mine. The doctor was standing between me and the new patient, performing some frantic activity. Eventually, the activity began to subside, and I thought him murmur something about it being hopeless. He moved aside to speak to a colleague, and I heard him utter the following. He shot himself with a .45. The bullet entered his right temple and exited above his left ear. There is no hope. My staring, conscious eyes were peering into the left side of his head. I watched unmoved as small globules of brain matter and fluids dripped and slid out of the gaping hole just above his ear. I completely forgot about my predicament and felt deeply sorry for this poor man. Finally, the serum arrived, and I was ready to receive the life-saving antivenom. I passed out, slowly melting into darkness. I never asked about the suicide. God knows how my parents found me. I guess my sister must have ratted on me, God bless her. As for my friend, I cannot remember what part, if any, he played after the event. My eyes opened 2 days later. My mother was sitting to my right. Surprised, I said, "Hi, how did you know I was here?" I had survived. This was not to be the last time.